Welcome to Jim White's Opportunity Investing Webinar. Jim has been investing, coaching executives, and turning around companies for over 30 years. Now your host, Dr. Jim White.
Hello, this is Jim White, and welcome to Opportunity Investing Webcast. It is March the 24th, 2020. This evening, I'm going to talk to you about leading in a crisis, which is also covered in my book, Opportunity Investing, which is launching on March 31st, 2020. I will say, however, when I started the book in April 2019, I had no idea that we would be in a crisis that we're in at lunchtime. Leading in a crisis, planning, delegating, and executing is covered in part 4 of the book. So again, when I started writing the book, I had no idea that we would be faced with the crisis that we're in. So therefore, I wanted to do a disclaimer and say this is not looking in a rearview mirror, if you will. It is data that I have used for years and years and years. And for you that joined me last week, I talked about we've seen 47 different crises in the United States. I myself have seen crises started in the 70s, as I referred to, and then the 80s, and then the 90s, and 2007, 2008, 2020. So I just wanted to be very clear that the topic that I was going to discuss was not looking backwards, but it was looking forward. So as we get into the content this evening, I want to be very clear that I am not a scientist, nor am I a medical professional. I am, however, a leader of several companies. And my 30 years in business and leading companies has taught me several things, one of which is how to lead in a crisis. The first step in any crisis is to be prepared for the crisis that's unknown. That may sound strange to a lot of our audience tonight, but you always got to be prepared. You got to have a plan, what I call for a plan and a backup plan for that crisis. You got to look at every scenario, where it be a health crisis, where it be a natural disaster, where it may be a financial crisis. Things requires planning. As a plan, and as you start executing the plan, I should say, in a crisis, it becomes, things are changing very, very rapidly. And as we broadcast this evening, have CNN background, and I've been watching it as I've been working all day. I'm seeing the news. I'm hearing that we got over 80 million people that for these orders to stay at home. It's just mind-boggling. And as we see this play, and as I have been talking to different clients throughout the day, talking to staff, talking to staff, and we've been talking about all the work that we've done for many years to plan and to be prepared. Also shared in our last session last week that as we started seeing this crisis unfold, we started immediately laying out different protocols that was required for this particular crisis. And this is still an unknown. It is fluid. It is breaking really rapidly. But again, one of the things that is equally important with a plan and a crisis plan, to have the behaviors and the mindsets. And I really want to stop and say that again. For you that know me, understand I'm going to say it and say it again and say it again. So if you have a good plan, and if you don't have the right team, if you don't have the right behaviors and mindset, because everything is here, right? It's in our mind that creates the biggest fear that we have. If you do not have the behaviors and the mindsets that will prevent your team. It could be a team of one or a team of thousands, a team of one, from overreacting to yesterday's developments. You must have the behaviors and the mindset to look forward and looking at your plan, following your plan, and then have the ability and teams. You got to throw the plan away and change in midstream. So that goes, have a plan, have a backup plan to your plan, right? Now, for me, it appears that the federal government did not get the memo about planning, or at least this current administration, as it seemed like the only thing that's coming out of the leadership by tweet these days. And it's just absolutely devastating because it sends such messages that are contradicting all of the professionals, the medical professionals. So who do you listen to? You've got your states, like state of California, which has been devastated, been hit. You got the state of New York. You got Washington State. You've got all the states and our governors giving a message. Then you've got a message coming from the White House, which is something different. We've got to be consistent. We've got to have consistent leadership. We've got to have consistent communication. And this is what I mean when I say you got to have behaviors and mindset. Now, during a crisis, when it unfolds, when you see it coming, sometimes a crisis will sneak up on you. And I think I've referred to that as a black swan in the past, right? That's unexpected. So a crisis will sneak up on you. And I say, in your plan, you have got to have a network of teams. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about more tonight and drill down on that. A network of teams capable of carrying out your response plan. And you got to carry this out outside of normal operations, as well as adjusting in real time to the routine business activities. So that's really critical. That is a huge undertaking to be able to carry this out. Now, I'm going to break the team structure down into three parts. I'm going to say we got the executive team. That's the team that makes the final decisions, right? Then I'm going to say the next part of the is what I call the response leadership team, which has three major elements. Now, this is in your crisis plan. Now, it is absolutely critical, because I can hear right now, a lot of the audience are saying, Jim, you're talking about teams. Well, I'm a small business and I only have me. And I get that. I say to you, I get it. I understand. However, where it's you as a single proprietor, or if it's you as a leadership of a multi-million-dollar, thousands of employees, the same applies. You've got to be able to respond to a crisis, right? And as I say, yeah, I get it. And a lot of you are saying, well, Jim, as I start laying out this further, if I can talk this evening, if I can start laying this out further, you're going to start seeing, I think, the clarity and the elements that you should ask yourself in your planning process, right? So what is a response leadership team? And the response leadership team, I say, has two major components. In this case, the current crisis we're in, I say it's a medical advisory, right? You got the medical advisory. Now, I'm going to stop there and go back a few years. When I was working international, which I did for a lot of years, I worked in a lot of third world countries. And part of our planning, we had to have medical teams. You didn't have that kind of thing. So you had all of these teams. So I'm accustomed to planning medically. Now, we've seen such a huge economic boom for the past 10 years or so that a lot of us have got complacent. And I get it. We think there's nothing that's going to get in our way for this absolute boom. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, we got this major world pandemic. It just come out of nobody. Bang. It just slapped us across the face, right? So I'm not sure. Many companies have a medical advisory board, right? But if you don't, one thing we can learn, and we always learn from every crisis, is what we can do better. I'm not suggesting that you're going to have a medical professional on staff at all times, but we need to have someone that we rely on, where we can call on in cases of emergency. Well, what does this medical advisory team do? They give overall guidance, and they try to interpret the guidelines that may be coming from the federal and state government and other agencies. That's their goal, is to be able to get accurate information to the front lines in a timely manner. Get it out to the line manager. Then we got what I call the network project management. What do they do? Well, that's when things start moving so fast, where you're a single person or where you are a group of 1,000 people, 10,000, 100,000, whatever that team may be. The network project management, they look at issues. They start drilling back and pulling back and trying to understand what the issues are. They're laying out different scenarios and trying to stay what I call an operational cadence, because you're not only managing a crisis, but you're trying to maintain your operational cadence, meaning, in other words, keeping your business afloat, right? So then you have what I call the action team. You got this action team. So recap, you got your executive team, which is the team that makes the final decision, right? Right? Then you have what's it called? In live in live events, when I got to change, I'll often repeat myself and say, what's it called? Well, it's called a response team, right? And so we moved through the response team, and it had the medical, and it had two components of that, primarily the network team, and that's the people that are looking at the issues, peeling the onion back, if you will, looking at different scenarios, looking at things that we need to be reacting to first and foremost. And then, like I said, you have the action team. Now, I break the action team down as follows. You have what I call is external communication. So the first thing, you got to get a handle of the external communication. You've got to provide regulatory alignment in all elements of what's coming at you. And you got to provide third-party communication to all your partners and your vendors, right? So again, in your planning process, that requires that you have good database, that the database is current, and you have the ability to do mass communication without getting all the bounce backs, right, if you will, in the email world, right? So it's the external communication. That's part of the action team that I'm talking about, right? And again, for the folks that are just joining us, as I said, I lay this out in opportunity investing, and I just want to make sure that I'm not being seen as that person that's jumping on the bandwagon here. All of a sudden, I don't know about you, but my email has just been flooded with people giving me solutions to buy something based on the crisis. And I certainly don't want to be that person. That's the reason I keep referencing this information is an opportunity invest in part 4 of the book and other material that I have, which is readily available to you. So another part of the team, and as you see my eyes float around here, I'm thinking about it as we go through, and just before we went live, I was talking to my team, and I said, well, what are you going to talk about? I said, well, I'm going to decide when I go live, right? So I often do that. I spend a lot of time planning, and then I say, and then it just starts fluid in the moment. So the other thing is financial. This is really critical. We're going to see, as a result of this crisis, a prolonged financial challenge. I'm going to use that word. And I like to use the word financial stress test. What's that mean? When you have a crisis, you need to know where you are and what I call the three scorecards. And they are your cash flow, what's the cash in the bank, your P&L, and your balance sheet. Well, you need to understand those companies that work too close to the edge, if you will, do not have a reserve. You've got to really take a look and start making some decisions pretty fast as to what are you going to do in case all of your income and business dries up. At what point are you going to have to make a decision as to when you start furloughing people? So that's what I mean about the actions team. You got to start looking at this stuff immediately, right? Well, again, this virus jumped on us a little bit, starting in December. And then unfortunately from the leadership coming from the White House, wasn't given much attention. I think we were all asleep to a certain degree. And then all of a sudden this thing's just started, it's just, wow, taken off since the 1st of March, right? So another part is your financial stress test. Now, if you're watching this live, or if you're watching the replay, I would suggest that this time, if you haven't done it, you need to go take a serious look at your financials and start making the decision as to what you can weather and what you cannot weather. What's the old saying? When you need money, it's too late to go ask the banks, right? And that's often the case. Like I said, I've been through a lot of financial crises, and I cannot stress this point enough. And we're talking about leading in a crisis, all the components that you should take into consideration, and you should start doing a check right now. Now, the next thing you got to take into consideration and leading in a crisis is your supply chain. Okay, your supply chain is probably going to be disrupted. When I say we got about 80 million people at home right now, and different state defined essential business, if you will. So your supply chain is going to be disrupted. And I've seen this in other crises where a lot of vendors, and I'm not, take no offense to anybody who's watching this, a lot of vendors will use this crisis as an excuse not to perform. And they probably couldn't have performed prior to the crisis, but they would certainly use this to a degree to offer excuses. So you got to look deep at your supply chain and the ability to restart that supply chain. You got to look at your exposure in your inventory, what you don't have, what you do have. Now, another thing's occurring right now, we talk about inventory. We have a shortage of respirators. We have a shortage of masks. We have a shortage of gloves. We have a shortage of all of those things, right? Well, a lot of that shortage is, again, for lack of planning. And again, I don't want to be looking in the rearview mirror or second guessing what it is. It's just an absolute part of the planning process that you got to look at all of these things and be prepared, right? And for you people that are hoarding everything, stop it. Knock it off, right? You got to be more responsible than going to the store and buying everything that you can get and not thinking about your fellow citizen as well. The other thing that's critical that's coming from the action team is the employee outreach. Well, the employee outreach, it is so critical that you communicate to your employees often and thorough, constant communication. You've got to quell the fears, constant communication every day, over communicate. And again, we talked about that last week in our session. The other piece, and for the action team to look at, is technology. Well, it's amazing. We're sitting here and we can broadcast, and technology is fantastic. I often say that I was born 40 or 50 years too early. I love technology. So technology in your planning process. Do you have the ability to work from home or a remote location? Do you have the infrastructure in place in order to be able to do that? So that's another thing. You have the support of the people that cannot work from home, if you will. So that's another thing that you need to be looking at. And I'm sure that at this stage, you're probably already looked at a lot of these things that I'm reviewing this evening. But if you haven't, I'd encourage you to do so. If you have, I encourage you to go take a deeper look. It doesn't hurt to take a deeper look, if you will. Now, the next thing that your action team needs to take in is your real estate, right? Real estate, your building management, your facility management, your factory management, all of those components. You've got to be able to manage to manage those. You've got to have systems in place to be able to protect your tenants. So all of those things are critical as well. Now, seems to be saying that a lot. Now, as you know, and I stated earlier, I have led several companies in addition to my passion for writing and coaching and teaching, which are all, in my opinion, integral parts of leadership. And I love coaching and teaching. My circle of success process, which a lot of you are familiar with, was actually born in part out of a crisis. And I remember when I actually looked, that was in the 80s. 84, 85, and 87, and then again in the 90s in the first Gulf, right? I owned a company in Belgium at that time, and we did a lot of business in the OPEC countries, and at that time, Iraq was one of them, and I had to, as a U.S. citizen, we had, those that are around at that time and remember back that many years ago, for the people that can't, there was embargoes and some of the things of the American system that we couldn't ship to those countries, which put us in some crisis, right? Now, as we continue to do what I call our health check, looking at all of our action teams, looking at our process teams, and the management, the executive team making final decisions, I want to take a little bit more time, and I want to drill down on 4 leadership musts. And I've already talked a lot about these so far in my talk, but I just want to reinforce a few. In a leadership in a crisis, and I remember this being the case, when as a young man, when I was in Vietnam, crisis allows for opportunities to elevate leaders within. You never know where that leader is going to come from until you see a crisis or you see them in action. So there's opportunities here. It is absolutely critical that you must remain calm and you must remain optimistic. Now, I don't want to confuse what's real and what's not. You got to tell the truth. You got to be straight on, but you also got to be calm and you got to be optimistic. I am very optimistic that we are going to solve this crisis. I am also realistic that we're going to have some prolonged financial consequences as a result of this crisis. And I'm also very confident there's going to be opportunity that comes as a result of this crisis. And I'm also confident that we're going to learn a lot from this crisis. I am absolutely certain of that. Now, the next thing we need to look at is making decisions. We talked a lot about that earlier, making decisions. And that is getting all the facts. And it's what I call pause, take a deep breath, take a look, analyze, then make a decision, and then anticipate the next hiccup, if you will. Anticipate the next barrier that may come your way. And as you're doing all of this, when you're doing your communication with your employees, with your within your community as a community leader, you've got to do it while you're demonstrating empathy as well. Empathy is a big part. Remember, I started off saying you got to have the beliefs, have the right mindset and belief system to be able to pull this off, and the right mindsets and behaviors to be able to lead in a crisis. So let's be very clear. In any crisis, you need to deal with the human tragedy first. It's a first priority. I think we all get that intuitively, but I've seen a lot of cases where that's not the case. So everything is out. Everything is out the window. My wife reminds me, and she's a New York girl, and 9/11. We all know 9/11, and it was a horrible day. There's so many people in the instant that lost their life on that horrible day in New York City, and how everybody came together and how everybody demonstrated. Well, this crisis is kind of like it's moving fast, but it's kind of eerie, if I can use that word, right? Because you can't see it. As horrible as it was, we have that image of those aircraft crashing into the towers, right? And I don't want to bring up any emotions that's negative. It's not my intent, but my intent is to say we've got to demonstrate empathy. We've got to deal with the human tragedy first, right? Now, I caution, and I think everybody know that I'm not a fan of the current administration, just of this crisis alone. But at the same time, I am seeing some things where I saw just today where the president said this crisis will be over by Thanksgiving. By Thanksgiving, be over by Easter. And we got to put everything back to work. We're all concerned about the stock market. We're all concerned about the economy. We need the economy. But if we don't have any people, we don't have any economy. So it's a double-edged sword. So I caution that we have got, in this case, we have got to take the best advice available to us from our medical professionals. Now, the next thing that we have in our leadership I'm going to say this, is the communicating effectively and to your employees. You've got to be transparent. You got to call it the way it is, and you got to provide frequent updates to your employees every day, all the time. Over communicate, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them again, right? So, as I start wrapping up the session this evening, I want to close by saying the coronavirus pandemic is testing leaders of all companies, all organizations, in all sectors around the world. Right now, no one is immune. Isn't that amazing how the globe is now so connected, where the globe is one with this pandemic? Think about that. We're one, fighting a common enemy. I'm going to use that word, the coronavirus, right? We're one. As I said, the consequences of this virus will last some time, and it's going to present greater difficulties than anyone can anticipate at this time, especially if it prolongs. And I was seeing a report where people were projecting up to 30% unemployment. Just think about that. We cannot allow that to happen, nor can we overreact and not deal. We got to put this virus out. The prolonged uncertainty is all the more reason for leaders to practice, and it sounds like I'm preaching here, I'm not, to practice what I've talked about today. Those who do will help establish or reinforce at least behaviors and values that can support your organization and communities during a crisis. However long it may continue, we will and need to be prepared. Plan. And I know a lot of people, a lot of business owners say, that's a waste of time. It's not a waste of time if you're doing the right planning, right? So for how long it takes, we will overcome this crisis. We will. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I know I am very optimistic. I know my team is optimistic. And I am here to do whatever I can in whatever small way there is through our webinars or any other way to say, keep the faith, persevere, take a lot of the tools that I've laid out for you this evening and go test them with your company and test them with your family and can test them with your communities, right? So with that, I'm going to say thank each and every one of you for participating this evening. And I know there may be some confusion once we put out the emails about the webcast. I know we got people that's already registered, and you think you may have to register again. My team had a great idea prior to going live. You don't have to do that. You'll just get a reminder, so you don't have to go register again. I know that's probably annoying. So we want to make sure that I wanted to share that with you as well. And for all the new people that's joined us in, thank you for that. I really appreciate you giving us some of your time. And again, we're here to do whatever it is in any small way that we have to help you through this crisis. And like I said, a lot of material, and it's going to be a shameless plug here, but we are releasing our book next Tuesday, March the 31st, which has a lot of this material in it. And I hope you avail yourself of that. And on the 31st of March, as I said, we got a great guest. I'm looking forward to that. And that's going to be a continuation of the series that we're going to start. So at that, I'm going to thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. And until the 31st, I'm going to say, have a good night. And we will talk to you on March the 31st. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you for your participation and interest in Jim White's Opportunity Investing webinar. To stay in touch with Jim, please go to www.opportunityinvesting.com.